On the night of the 14th of April, 1912, the most advanced ship ever built received 6 warnings, 6 separate messages, all saying the same thing: there is ice ahead. The captain received them. The officers discussed them. And then the ship kept sailing at full speed, into the dark, into the cold, into the exact stretch of ocean every single warning had described. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, 1,500 people were dead. This is not the story of an accident. This is the story of the decisions that made it inevitable. By the end of this video, you will understand something the movies never showed you. The Titanic did not sink because of bad luck. It sank because of a chain of decisions made by real human beings that each seemed reasonable in the moment and catastrophic in combination. The 6 ice warnings that were ignored, the lifeboat shortage known about before the ship left port, the wireless message that never reached the bridge, the ship close enough to help that did nothing, and the single most controversial question historians still argue about today: could more people have been saved? The RMS Titanic was not just a ship, it was a statement. Built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, owned by the White Star Line, 269 meters long, 46,000 tons, carrying 2,224 people on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. Described by the press, the public, and the men who built her as practically unsinkable. That word would haunt everyone who used it. Her hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments. She could survive any 2 flooded, even 3 or 4 in some conditions. This made her safer than almost any ship ever built. But it also created a dangerous confidence, a belief that the worst could never happen. That confidence, more than the iceberg, is what killed 1,500 people. In first class were some of the wealthiest people in the world: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's. In third class, deep below the waterline, were hundreds of immigrants: Irish, Scandinavian, Lebanese, people who had scraped together every penny for a ticket to a new life in America. None of them knew that in 4 days the ocean would make no distinction between them. On April 14, the last full day of the voyage, the wireless operators received ice warning after ice warning. 9 a.m. The Coronia, large icebergs reported. 1:42 p.m. The Baltic, ice and large quantities of field ice directly in the Titanic's path. 1:45 p.m. The America, 2 large icebergs. 7:30 p.m. The Californian, 3 large icebergs. 9:40 p.m. The Mesaba, heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs directly in the Titanic's course. That final warning from the Mesaba never reached the bridge. Wireless operator Jack Phillips, overwhelmed with passenger messages, set it aside and never passed it on to Captain Smith. 6 warnings. Received, noted, and largely ignored. Why? Because in 1912, sailing through ice-reported waters at full speed was standard practice. Captain Edward Smith was one of the most experienced captains in the fleet. He had crossed the Atlantic hundreds of times, received ice warnings hundreds of times. Nothing had ever happened. This was his last voyage before retirement. He had no reason to believe this night would be any different. He was catastrophically wrong. But here is the detail that changes everything. The Titanic's lookouts in the crow's nest that night had no binoculars. The binoculars existed. They were in a locker on the ship. But the key had been accidentally taken off the ship by an officer reassigned before departure. So, on the clearest night of the voyage, on the night every warning said ice was ahead, the 2 men whose only job was to spot danger could only use their naked eyes. They spotted the iceberg at 11:39 p.m. It was already too late. Look out. Frederick Fleet rang the bell 3 times and called the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. First Officer Murdoch ordered hard to starboard and reversed the engines. The Titanic began to turn. Only 37 seconds passed between the sighting and the collision. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck the iceberg on its starboard side. A glancing blow. The iceberg scraped along the hull for 90 meters, punching small holes and buckling steel plates across 5 watertight compartments. On deck, it felt like almost nothing. A slight shudder. Most passengers slept through it. 30 meters below the waterline, water was already pouring in. Thomas Andrews walked through the flooding sections with Captain Smith. He counted the compartments, did the mathematics. The Titanic was built to survive 4 flooded. 5 were now open to the sea. Andrews gave his verdict quietly. 1 to 2 hours, perhaps less. 2,224 people were aboard. The lifeboats had space for 1,178. Even if every lifeboat was filled to capacity, over 1,000 people would be left in the water. Water that was -2 degrees Celsius. A human being lasts approximately 15 to 30 minutes in water that cold before their heart stops. The lifeboat shortage was not a surprise. It was a known fact before the ship left port. British Board of Trade regulations required ships over 10,000 tons to carry 16 lifeboats. The Titanic carried 20, exceeding the legal requirement. But the regulations hadn't been updated since 1894, written for ships a fraction of the Titanic's size. The designers had actually proposed 64 lifeboats, enough for everyone. The proposal was rejected. Too cluttered, bad for the view of the first-class promenade deck, and even those insufficient lifeboats weren't used properly. The first lifeboat launched had a capacity of 65. It left with 28 people. Lifeboat number 1 had a capacity of 40. It left with 12. Why? Partly because passengers didn't believe the ship was actually sinking. The warm-lit staterooms felt safer than a small wooden boat on a freezing dark ocean. Partly because the crew had no clear plan for a disaster of this scale. And partly because third-class passengers were physically separated from the lifeboats by locked gates and language barriers that cost hundreds of them their lives. While the Titanic sank, another ship sat less than 20 miles away, the SS Californian. Its wireless operator had sent one of the ice warnings the Titanic received that evening. At 11 p.m., just 40 minutes before the collision, the Californian tried to contact the Titanic again to warn them it had stopped for the night because of ice. Phillips, overwhelmed, sent back a sharp reply. "Shut up. Shut up. I am busy." The Californian's operator switched off his wireless and went to bed. Shortly after midnight, the Californian's officers saw white rockets firing from a large ship on the horizon. They reported it to Captain Stanley Lord. Lord asked whether they were company signals. Nobody could say for certain. Lord went back to sleep. 8 rockets in total. The distress signal protocol was clear. Rockets at night meant a vessel in distress. The Californian did not move. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic sank. The lights on the horizon disappeared. The Californian's operator woke at 5:30 a.m. and learned from another ship what had happened. The Californian arrived at the scene at 8:30 a.m. By then, the Carpathia had already rescued the 710 survivors and was heading to New York. Had the Californian started moving at 1 a.m., it would have arrived while the Titanic was still afloat, with 14 empty lifeboats, in a calm, flat sea. The subsequent inquiry called the Californian's inaction one of the most serious failures of seamanship in maritime history. Captain Lord denied until his death that his ship could have helped. The 1,500 people in the water could not argue back. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic slipped beneath the waves. 1,500 people in the water, in darkness, in -2-degree ocean, screaming for help that never came. Only one lifeboat went back. Lifeboat 14, commanded by 5th Officer Harold Lowe, retrieved 13 people from the water. By the time it returned, most of the 1,500 had already died from the cold. The Titanic disaster changed maritime law permanently. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for every person aboard. Wireless operators had to be on duty 24 hours a day. Ice patrols were established in the North Atlantic. Rules that should have existed before 1,500 people died to prove they were necessary. Somewhere in the debris field on the ocean floor, scattered across 2 miles, are the personal belongings of 1,500 human beings. Shoes, suitcases, a child's toy. A pocket watch stopped at the exact moment its owner entered the water. The ocean kept all of it. The ocean always keeps everything. Which decision do you think cost the most lives? The speed, the lifeboats, the Californian, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Iron Ink. Every week we go deeper into the ships the ocean refused to give back. Iron Ink, where the ocean tells the truth, the deep never forgets.